Sebastian Stan, you're having a great year with two performances that have earned quite a bit of attention in The Apprentice and A Different Man. I want to talk about both, but let's start with The Apprentice, where you played Donald Trump during his rise as a real estate mogul in New York. Bold move. So, what made you want to go there?
Well, I think honestly, I guess maybe the fear of of and the fear of doing it, and perhaps also just my lack of actual knowledge about this person. I have found, I think like everybody else, I've been inundated with just constant influx of information online, SNL impressions, headlines. Horrific sound bites of his. And I maybe had my own sort of ideas of the guy, but I actually feel like I didn't really know who he was or what happened. How did he become what he became? And then the script got sent to me by the wonderful Carmen Cuba in 2019 with a phenomenal director, Ali Abbasi, whose work I really admired. And he and I connected basically with our European roots. And of course, I grew up, in communism, Romania, and certainly in a time period where I've seen people live in fear and be silenced. And obviously he has his own background coming from Iran and escaping and living in Copenhagen. And so I thought, if anyone's going to kind of come at this and in a way, perhaps in a non-biased way, was perhaps a European. And he expressed to me this vision of saying, hey, I don't want to come at this. I just want to really find out who this guy is. I think if we can get to the bottom of it, then maybe we'll learn something. And so I respected that. I thought that was an interesting, different take. I don't think anyone's done that before. And look, as an actor, sometimes, right, you're hoping to find projects that really challenge you, but also truly ask very important, uncomfortable questions, and projects and artists that are going to be fearless and really are interested in reflecting our times. And we're talking about someone who's affected all of our lives, and I felt there was a responsibility there in a way to go in there and really try to um, hold a mirror up to nature. That's kind of what we set out to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned SNL because when I was watching it, I was like, you have to play this carefully because it could go into caricature mode and look like this sort of funny interpretation, but you do a really great job of balancing that. How did you prepare for like to master his mannerisms without it looking like a joke?
Well, look, I mean, I liken it a lot to learning an instrument. I mean, there's a little bit of that 10,000 hour rule, I mean, I think you study footage and listen to audio for hours on end. I mean, basically it takes over your life. And again, you got to remember, I had a couple months with this film. I mean, actually almost years, because it would start and stop. And you set out every day kind of sitting there and practicing it, and it's very slow, and it's very kind of it takes a long time, and then eventually you kind of get better at it, and then you can just do it in your sleep and not sort of think about it. You want it to become organic, and you want it to feel earned, and it's not something you're conscious of. I think the caricature, the cartoon, the SNL impression, was going to always be a mountain to climb, because again, you're talking about somebody that's very well known. Everyone's got some back pocket impression of him. But it was also something we've seen. It's also something we've had enough of. I felt it was getting over the hurdle of how do you get people invested in the film and going on this journey of truly experiencing this person despite of everything they know so far. And that was a real, careful kind of modulated volume, sort of that Ali and I had to navigate in terms of what are the things about him that you can recognize and feel the guy, rather than that feel put on or feel, because because yeah, the margin or error for me was very small. I mean, you do one thing too much and a little gesture too much, and suddenly you're like, I'm out of it. It's the caricature. But you have to remember Trump. A lot of people don't remember what he was like back then in the 80s and 90s, especially in the 70s. Like he didn't start out to be this character. He's actually been inventing himself every 10 years, arguably. I mean, it's quite fascinating because people change, but we don't all change that much and that drastically. And he's had very different points in his life where that led him to this. The building of Trump Tower was one. In the 90s, I think arguably Atlantic City was another sort of point for him in terms of shaping him further and further into who he is. And then really The Apprentice, the show, which is the version we've been living with, that this character that he's really learned pretty well and shaped in that show. But for our purposes, when you go back in time, there was a guy that was really not that sure of himself in a way. And look, I mean, a lot of people have, and again, we're going to have to see what the stomach is for the film, because the film sort of, a lot of people have embraced the film, just maybe not publicly, but we hear about it all the time. Oh, the movie is amazing and you guys did an incredible job, and I'm so taken in this and that. And it's about sort of, okay, well, are we going to be able to look at this person from a three-dimensional place? And maybe we should, because he did win the popular vote for one, and I think that he requires a lot more sort of a closer look than just an SNL impression. I mean, the question will be whether or not people want to admit that.
Yeah. And I spoke to you when you did Pam and Tommy, and you talked about, you went out to dinner with Tommy Lee and you had all this some sort of a relationship. Obviously, you didn't do that in this. What's the biggest difference for you when you're playing a real person and you can get to know someone versus when you just sort of have to go off what you
Well,
see?
even like Tommy Lee, I didn't meet him until the very end, actually. So a lot of the work had been done. I think sometimes it helps, obviously, if you can meet the person. There's just something that happens. But in terms of here, again, there's so much footage. There's so much out there already, research in terms of who this person is, and so I think I'm not even sure if it would have helped for me to meet the person now, because the movie's not focusing on now. The movie is really focusing on who he was back then. And I think yes, there are these recognizable things, right, that you have to have, um, and you have to pick and choose, because, for instance, I didn't want to. First of all, he didn't sound back then like he sounds now,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to focus too much on the voice, because I actually felt that that was going to take away from you experiencing him in a very different way, in a more realistic, grounded way, because that's one of the things that ends up being the caricature way of going. But I think you have to pick those things that are recognizable, and then you have to go inside like any other character and really ask, what is it about this person that drives them? What is it about them that, what are they after? What are they, what is the motivation? Who are they really? Who are they hiding? What are they masking? And that's just like the acting work 101.
And you get to work with Jeremy Strong, who plays Roy Cohn, and Maria Bakalova, who's Ivana, and both of them are so great. I mean, was part of this fun to see those performances and go back and forth with them? What was that like?
Well, we had a very chaotic way of shooting, because what happened was the movie wasn't going to happen, and then suddenly we were able to get actually we got a SAG waiver, and then we were able to shoot in Toronto in -0 weather, basically over the holidays of last year, and everything was locations. We were very light dependent. And I was in the chair at 4 in the morning, basically, and then I was heading home at like 9 p.m. and then getting up to do it all over again. Friday nights, we would shoot early into Saturdays, and Saturday and Sunday was just like staying in the hotel room and basically like obsessively going over what the next week was going to be. I I never saw, we didn't, there was no outside world besides, being these people for that period of time. I never saw Jeremy outside of sort of outside of set and in the scene, and vice versa, and same with Maria. And I'd never been that immersed in something where I'm even telling loved ones that they can't come see me on the weekend. But this was the nature of the thing, that how this had to play out. And I think for us to be fully in it the entire time, I mean, that was probably helpful in a way. But I only felt that the relationship with Jeremy and Maria both, from that angle, kind of helped us in terms of the work and what transpired. It's also, we're playing, there's an accent, there's a certain way of speaking, it's a period movie. I mean, there was a lot of things about this that required you to just be staying in it the entire time. There's no, especially when you're speaking a certain way, I think you get very mindful of not wanting to lose that. So you know, I like, afterwards, Jeremy and I kind of saw each other, and I was like, oh, like you're like a really nice guy. You're like a really good dude. Um, but I think it was the great partnerships. I mean, they were really great partnerships, both of them. So
And then this struggle to get this released. I mean, you had to go through some hurdles. Was that just a relief just to get it into theaters? And then, I mean, what if all this hard work just gets shelved? That would be a disaster.
what's happening is, it's interesting to deal with this movie now, especially in award season and post election. Like, it's the same as it's always been making this movie since 2019. Okay, which is, for some reason, we had to go into it without an expectation of a result. There were times before we started where I just didn't know if I was going to pull it off, if people were going to get it, if we were going to make the movie, and or even when the movie was going to come out. I mean, we finished shooting February 1st of this year, and then he had a cut for Cannes 3 months later. It's like, anyone that's done any films whatsoever is going to recognize that's an impossible feat to get a movie that quickly, especially a period movie, and one that was largely improvised as well. And so when we got to Cannes, suddenly we finally got there, and then we found out that we have one of the producers is trying to stop the release of the film, even though they read the script and signed on to it with what was written in the script. Then it suddenly became, wow, okay, like maybe this thing's really not going to come out. And by the way, we tried to do it in 2019. We could have maybe made it then. It would have come out in the pandemic in 2020. Maybe nobody would have seen it. Then it was like, okay, let's try to make it later. And then a January 6th happened. So then maybe that wouldn't have happened. We were trying to make it in 2020, early 2022, which would have, maybe the film could have come out in 23, and it would have been the strike, or, like, this was the only time for this film to come out, ultimately. So there's a certain point you just sort of throw your hands up in the air and go, okay, like, this is beyond me. I don't, whatever the force is that's making this movie or propelling it and forward, is its own path. But I think the journey was going into this and saying, okay, we're going to give this our all. We're going to really, really try to not be biased here. We're going to look at this as fairly as we possibly can and include all of the information that's out there, and then hope for the best. And so this is kind of what we ended up with.
And you play a very different man in a different man, and the title makes that an easy transition. It's this dark comedy where you play Edward, a man with neurofibromatosis.
I mean, it was such a unique, different film, and I really hope people get to still see it. I know it's out now on VOD and so on, and not just in terms of how unbelievably unpredictable the movie is. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like, it's funny, it's tragic, and everybody that's seen it always says, "Wow, I had no idea that was going to happen." So it's exciting for an actor when you read something and you actually feel surprised by the material. But then there was this underlying message here about identity and self-truth, and not just how it pertains to disability and disfigurement and how we don't really have a relationship with that at all, how we are curious but are afraid to rely on our curiosity, and therefore we manage to not walk away with any education or any awareness whatsoever about someone's experience in those shoes. But beyond disfigurement and disability, it really is about something we're all facing now, which is who am I, and who am I separately from how I look to other people to tell me who I am. And neurofibromatosis is a really, Adam Pearson, who's in the movie, actually has it. Uh, it's a real condition where you have these tumors that develop when you're 3 or 4 years old, and it really drastically changes your features. And I play an actor that has the condition and then undergoes sort of a trial period experiment that's sort of meant to help him kind of shrink these tumors and then look more abled like everybody else, so to speak. And it was a very tricky line to walk, right? Because we've had Adam Pearson, who has the condition in the movie, and then I'm playing a character that has the prosthetics. And I actually feel like the prosthetics, which were by Mike Marino, were so great that at times people don't even know it's me or him. But if you watch the movie, it's so cleverly and expertly woven together by Aaron, the writer director, who himself is disfigured. And it's really about kind of what happens to this person that has denied himself for so long, and then when he thinks he gets this life that he's always wanted, he finds out that the cost he paid was his true self, and by the time he tries to kind of get back to get his life back, it's too late. And it's yeah, it's a crazy one. It's a crazy one, but I just thought it was so masterful, even from just the idea of how Aaron, the director, talks about representation and trying to make a movie which is so difficult to make, actually, in terms of not just representing but not exploiting, but also being able to tell a story that kind of encompasses all.
And Adam, as you mentioned, plays Oswald. And when Edward meets Oswald, he's like he sees Oswald as this confident, charismatic person, and it pisses him off. Like he's like, "Why do you get to feel that way?" What does that say about society and how we sort of want what other people possess, no matter what our situation is?
Yeah, well, so basically, what happens is my character undergoes this change. He goes out there, he thinks life is going to be different, and it actually, he realizes that it's not different at all. He feels more of a fake than he did before. And then here comes this character played by Adam Pearson, who has the same condition, and seemingly he's so confident and he's so gregarious and he so owns himself that's like everyone around him doesn't seem to be put off or even mind or aware of how he looks. And so this spiral of obsessiveness kind of starts to develop for the character as he's following him and trying to figure out why. Does he know him from before? It just becomes a bit of a paranoid thriller. And Adam is so brilliant in the film, obviously, and he's getting to play a character as himself in a very way than we've seen. And I think that's another special thing about the movie, how we haven't seen someone like Adam play sort of a character like that. You always see the stereotype of the broken down loner, kind of outcast, and so on and so forth. But that's also what's strange to my character about him. And what does it say? I think it's pretty spot on about how we feel, when we're living life off of social media, when we're constantly looking everywhere for the fix, whether it's Ozempic, whether it's a new diet, whether it's oat milk versus whole milk, whether it's vaccine or not, whether whether it's any filter that we're putting on these pictures, we're it's pretty truthful, I think, to that in terms of what happens when we just don't embrace the things about ourselves that make us unique, and I think in terms of my character's experience, the lesson he learns, because if he only had done that, he could have had such a different life, is sort of kind of very impactful at the end.
Yeah. I watched this and I thought, you know what? Who needs good hair anyway? Um, is there is there any
Hair's another one. Yeah, exactly.
is there
Like,
anything that you've always wanted to change about yourself, and did this make you feel differently?
no, honestly, it was really enlightening for me because I've spoken about this. I was able to walk around New York City in these prosthetics, and I nobody recognized me, and uh, nobody thought I was an actor in prosthetics. Everyone believed me to be what I appeared, and there was it was such a powerless feeling in the sense of just being watched and being so that feeling of invasiveness of being public property, which of course I know a little bit about just by simply being a recognizable person. And that's one thing that Adam and Aaron really wanted me to know. They actually wanted me to lean into this thing of, hey, you know what it's like to be filmed, you know what it's like to kind of people pointing at you or tapping you on the shoulder or whatever. And so, but it didn't, if anything, it taught me more about how much I don't know, how much, of course, I also, like everybody else, have to do work in terms of owning myself and the things that maybe are different or are not right. It's like, for me, I mean, now at 42, it's easier to say. I wish at 25, I could have been like, oh, I wish I worried less, or I wish I was as less neurotic about some things. But really, in a way, that's just part of who I am. I think I look at somebody like Adam Pearson, who, unlike many people who have the condition, sort of, he had always been taught to you know keep his head high. He actually owns himself more than I feel I've seen many people that are, to be honest, in this business, famous and have money and have opportunity and whatever, and are still kind of playing a character rather than being who they are. And here's this guy who is so completely in touch with himself. And so it was very inspiring from that point of view, I guess.
And a real quick final question. I've seen you say that growing up you were a fan of Jim Carrey's like Ace Ventura type of movies. You've done comedy, but like there's always do you have any desire to just go be ridiculous? Like, do you want to do something that's just outlandish, like Ace Ventura or a Dumb and Dumber?
I mean, but of course, but like, or any, Robin Williams movies that I loved growing up. I mean, but comedy is hard. I feel like, like those films are hard. I don't, Dumb and Dumber is such a classic. I don't know. Somebody was telling me the other day, like, they were like, oh, when's the last time you watched Step Brothers? And I go, oh my God, that movie is fucking unbelievable. I mean, there are those films. I may not be the guy they think of, like, to call, but I of course I've wanted to kind of have the opportunity at that. I mean, I was trying when I was younger with Hot Tub Time Machine or something, but yeah, I think comedy um is a really intuitive way to get us to kind of experience things that are difficult. And I think the best comedy always comes from some grounded reality or truth.
Well, Sebastian, congratulations on two great films and good luck this award season.
Thank you, man. It's nice to see you again. Appreciate you taking the time.